Halfway to the airport, my son shouted, "Turn the car around, now!" I didn't question it. Not because I knew what was going on, I didn't, but because something in his voice cut through me. Daniel wasn't the kind of kid who raised his voice. At 17, he'd developed that kind of quiet resistance that you don't notice until it's full-blown distance. He didn't argue or slam doors, he just shut down. And in that moment, something in his tone told me that silence was cracking. I took the next exit without a word, glancing at him only once. He sat stiffly in the passenger seat, eyes locked on the windshield, fingers twitching in his lap like they wanted to say what his mouth couldn't. "Talk to me," I finally said. He didn't answer right away. We were merging onto Route 16, the skyline of Boston behind us, the Logan departure terminal ahead. Or at least, it had been. "I need to see her," he said. Those 4 words sucked the air right out of the car. I didn't need to ask who he meant. Claire, my ex-wife, his mother, the woman I hadn't seen or spoken to in over 10 years. The silence returned, heavy and sharp like glass between us. "Are you sure?" I asked. He nodded, eyes still forward. I have to." My hands clenched the steering wheel. The idea of seeing Claire again, after all this time, after everything she'd done, everything she'd walked away from, made something bitter rise in my throat. But this wasn't about me. It was about him. It had always been about him. So I turned the car around, back through the quiet streets of Arlington, back toward the part of our lives that neither of us had touched in over a decade. Daniel sat in silence, and I let him. I knew if I pushed too hard, he'd retreat. I'd learned that the hard way, through years of short answers, missed birthdays, and his eyes always searching the door during school plays. "Does she know you're coming?" I asked after a while. He shook his head. "No?" That didn't surprise me. Claire and I hadn't exchanged a single personal word since the divorce. All communication had been about Daniel, filtered through emails, lawyers, and later, total silence. When he was 12, he stopped going to her house on weekends. He never explained why. I never asked. Maybe that was my mistake. Her house looked the same when we pulled up. Pale green siding, sagging porch, mailbox still duct-taped at the hinge. The maple tree out front had gotten taller, but everything else was frozen in time, like her life had gone on pause the day she left. Daniel got out slowly. He looked nervous, really nervous, for the first time in years. I stayed in the car, watching him walk up the steps like he was approaching a stranger's house. He rang the bell and stepped back. My pulse thudded in my ears. Then the door opened, and there she was, Claire, older, thinner, her auburn hair now streaked with grey. She blinked at him for a long second before her mouth opened just a little. "Danny?" Her voice cracked, unsure, fragile, like a ghost remembering its own name. "Hi, Mom," he said. And in that moment, I saw it. All the years between them crashing together in a single impossible instant. I didn't know what would happen next. I didn't even know what I wanted to happen, but I knew we'd crossed a line, and there was no going back. I stayed in the car watching from behind the windshield like some kind of coward, but the truth is, I didn't know what the hell to do with myself. I hadn't seen Claire in over 10 years, and suddenly my son was standing in her doorway, like time had decided it was done waiting. She opened the door wider, stepping onto the porch. Her hands trembled slightly, but her face tried to hold it together. Claire had always been like that. She never cried in front of anyone. Not even the day she packed her bags and left. "Danny," she said again, softer this time, like maybe saying it twice would make it real. What are you doing here?" "I was on my way to the airport," he said. "I couldn't leave before seeing you." Claire looked stunned. She glanced around him, maybe expecting someone else, maybe even me. And for a moment, our eyes met through the car windshield. I don't know what I expected in her face. Anger, regret, guilt. But what I saw was fear. Not the kind that runs from danger, but the kind that knows it's about to face something long buried. "Do you want to come in?" she asked him, stepping aside. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. He walked inside and the door closed behind them. I sat in the car, engine idling, fingers drumming against the steering wheel like they had somewhere else to be. But there was nowhere to go. Not really. Because this, whatever was happening inside that house, had been waiting to happen for a long, long time. 15 minutes passed, then 20. I was just about to turn the engine off when the door opened again. Daniel stepped out. He didn't look angry or upset, just overwhelmed, like someone who'd seen a photo from childhood that he couldn't remember being taken. He walked back to the car and got in, closing the door gently behind him. "Well?" I asked. He stared ahead, his voice quiet. "She said she's sorry." I blinked. "What for?" He swallowed. "For everything. For leaving, for not being there, for not calling. She said she didn't know how to come back once she left." I nodded slowly. I'd always wondered if she'd ever felt remorse. For me, sure, but mostly for him. For the birthdays missed, the school plays, the time he broke his arm and asked if she'd call. She never did. "Did you forgive her?" I asked. He looked down at his hands. "I don't know yet." The honesty in that answer hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't some dramatic declaration of forgiveness. It wasn't a hallmark ending. It was real, raw, the way healing usually begins. "She wants to talk to you," he said. I froze. "What?" "She asked if you'd come inside." That caught me off guard. I hadn't expected that. Honestly, I thought I was just the driver in this story. But suddenly the past was reaching out with both hands. I stared at the porch, at the faint shadow of her behind the screen door. And I didn't move. I didn't move. My hands gripped the steering wheel as if it could keep me grounded, like the thin leather beneath my fingers might somehow protect me from what waited behind that door. "She wants to talk to me?" I asked again, just to make sure I hadn't heard it wrong. Daniel nodded. "Yeah. She said she doesn't expect anything. Just that she owes it to you. To explain." Explain. That word was a loaded gun in my chest. What could she possibly explain after all this time? After disappearing from our lives without a backward glance? After the holidays I spent sitting across from an empty seat, pretending it didn't matter, pretending Daniel didn't notice. "Dad," he said gently, "you don't have to." But I could tell he wanted me to. Not for her, for himself, for the part of him that still didn't understand why everything fell apart. I exhaled slowly and turned off the engine. "I'll go," I said, "but I'm not promising anything." Daniel nodded again, not pushing. He stayed in the car while I got out. My legs felt stiff, like they didn't quite believe what I was about to do. The walk to the porch was short, but it felt like miles. Claire opened the door before I could knock. For a moment, neither of us spoke. She looked at me like she didn't know where to begin. Her eyes, those same hazel eyes that once saw every corner of me, now seemed unsure, apologetic. I didn't know what mine was showing. Probably the same bitterness I'd been carrying for over a decade. "Hi," she said finally. "Hi." She stepped aside and I walked in. The living room looked almost exactly the same. Same couch, same bookshelves, the same photo of Daniel at age 4 on the mantel. Except now, the photo looked like it belonged to another life, someone else's memory. "I didn't think you'd come in," she said. "I almost didn't." She nodded, folding her arms like she was bracing herself. "I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but I meant it. I want to explain." "Then explain," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She flinched slightly, but she didn't retreat. "I was drowning," she began. "Back then, when I left, I didn't know who I was anymore. I felt like a ghost in my own life. I was angry all the time, at you, at myself, at everything." I didn't interrupt. I wanted to yell, to ask her how she thought I felt, how I managed to stay, to hold everything together for Daniel while she vanished into thin air. But I didn't, because some part of me, the exhausted part, wanted to finally hear the story from her lips. "I thought leaving would help," she continued. "I thought I'd find clarity, strength, something. But all I found was regret. You didn't call. Not once." "I know." Her voice cracked. "I was ashamed. And the longer I stayed away, the harder it got to come back." A heavy silence fell between us. Then she said, I didn't stop loving him. I want you to know that. I just didn't know how to love myself then, and I thought I'd only poison him if I stayed." I let those words sink in. It wasn't an apology, not exactly, but it was something. And for the first time in years, I saw her not as the woman who left, but as someone who broke, just like I did, in different ways. I looked back toward the car, where Daniel sat waiting, and I wondered what kind of man he might become if he could witness both his parents, flawed, wrecked, human, finally facing the ghosts that tore them apart. Claire sat down on the edge of the couch, hands clasped in her lap like she was holding something delicate, or maybe holding herself together. I remained standing, not out of pride, but because my body didn't know where to settle. Every corner of that room had a shadow of the past etched into it. She glanced up at me. "I didn't ask him to come." "I know," I said. "He made that decision." "I was shocked," she said, almost to herself. "When I opened the door, he looked so much like you. Same jaw, same eyes." I sat down in the armchair across from her, the one I used to read bedtime stories from. The armrest still had a faint tear from when Daniel was 5 and tried to feed it peanut butter crackers. "He doesn't talk about you much," I said. She looked down, nodding slowly. "I figured. You didn't try to reach out." She winced. "I wanted to, 100 times, but every time I picked up the phone, I didn't know what to say. I thought he hated me." I didn't respond. I didn't know how to tell her that hate wasn't the word. What Daniel felt was something heavier, a kind of grief that doesn't go away because the person is still alive. "He needed you," I said, my voice low. "I know," she whispered. "You missed everything." She nodded again, tears welling in her eyes. "I deserve every bit of that." There was no defense, no excuse, just that raw, open wound between us. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until she asked quietly, "How was he growing up?" That question did something strange to me. For a moment I was transported back, to scraped knees, to science fairs, to his first heartbreak at 15 when he locked himself in his room and blasted music for 3 days. "He was amazing," I said, the words catching. "Kind, smart, quiet, like you, but funny too. When he let himself be." She smiled faintly. "He always had a quiet sense of humor." "You should have seen him at his high school graduation," I continued, despite myself. "God, Claire. He looked so proud. He spoke at the podium, said he wanted to be a teacher, said he wanted to make sure no kid ever felt invisible." That last sentence hung in the air. Her face crumpled, and the tears finally fell. "I didn't want to be invisible," she whispered. "I was just so lost." I looked at her, and I didn't see the woman who walked out on me. I saw someone fractured, someone who, like me, made mistakes they didn't know how to fix. "He's trying to forgive you," I said. She wiped her cheek with the sleeve of her sweater. "Is he?" "I think so, but I don't think he knows how yet." She nodded. "Maybe neither do I." Another silence, but it didn't feel as sharp this time. "I never forgave you either," I said, surprising myself. Claire looked up, eyes wide. "Not really," I went on. "I told myself I did, for Daniel's sake. But part of me held on to it. Like if I let go of the anger, I'd be letting you off the hook." "What changed?" she asked. I thought for a second, then shrugged. "He shouted at me in the car, told me to turn around, and I did." She gave a small, sad laugh. "That sounds like him. I think he's stronger than both of us." She nodded. "He always was." Outside, the sky had turned a deeper gray, the kind of late afternoon that feels like a question waiting to be answered. Claire looked at me then, not with apology, but with recognition. Like we'd both lived different versions of the same pain. And maybe, just maybe, we were tired of carrying it alone. We sat there, 2 ghosts in a house that once held a family. The ticking of a wall clock filled the room, and I could almost hear Daniel's 6-year-old laugh echoing faintly off the walls, the way it used to bounce around when he wore his Batman cape and jumped from the stairs, believing just for a while that he could fly. "I used to sit in this room after work," I said quietly, staring at the bookshelves, just listening to him breathe in his sleep. You remember how he used to hum when he slept? Claire smiled through her tears. Yeah, like a little motor. I'd sit here and just listen to that hum. It was the only thing that made me feel like I hadn't screwed everything up. She was silent for a while, then said, I used to sit in the car outside his school sometimes, just to see him walk out. He didn't know. I'd park far away so he wouldn't see me, but I needed to see him. I turned to her, stunned. Why didn't you come in? I was afraid, she said simply. Afraid he'd look at me and hate what he saw. Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. I wanted to knock on your door so many times. Birthdays, Christmas, when he got his license. I was there when he took the test, sitting in a car 2 rows behind. He never knew. I couldn't step forward. I sat with that for a moment, heart pounding. Part of me wanted to be furious. How dare she stand on the sidelines of his life like that? But another part, the quieter part, understood all too well what shame can do to a person. She looked at me with wet eyes. You did so much for him. Thank you. I shook my head. I didn't do it for you. I know, she said, but I needed to say it anyway. We both fell into silence again, this time the kind that wasn't tense, just tired, worn from years of holding too much. Then Claire asked something I wasn't ready for. Do you think he'll ever forgive me? I looked toward the window where Daniel sat in the car, hunched slightly forward, elbows on his knees, staring at nothing. I don't know, I said honestly. But he came here. That's something. She nodded, wiping her cheeks. I kept the photo albums, she said, from when he was little. I look at them sometimes. I thought maybe he'd want them someday. I didn't know if that was too hopeful. Maybe not, I said. He's been asking more about the past lately. Not out loud, but I can feel it. He's digging, trying to make sense of things. Claire looked down at her lap again. I don't deserve his forgiveness. I hesitated before answering. None of us do. Not really. That's what makes it forgiveness. She closed her eyes, and for a moment, I saw the Claire I used to know. The woman who held my hand during Daniel's first fever, who cried with joy when he said, Mama, who once believed we'd grow old together. I want to try, she whispered, if he lets me, if you let me. I'm not the gatekeeper, I said, but I won't stop him. If he wants a relationship with you, I'll support that. Tears rolled down her cheeks again, and she nodded, pressing her lips together to keep them from trembling. Outside, Daniel opened the car door. He stepped out, took a breath, and started walking back toward the house. We both watched him approach, the rhythm of his footsteps somehow familiar and foreign at the same time. Claire stood up, suddenly unsure of herself. Should I? Just be there, I said. That's all he ever wanted. She nodded, stepping toward the door. And in that moment I realized something simple and profound. Sometimes forgiveness begins not with the words, but with the presence, just being there, even after all the years you weren't. Daniel stepped through the doorway with the kind of caution I'd only ever seen in him after his first heartbreak. That quiet, deliberate movement, like he was walking into something that could fall apart at the slightest wrong step. Claire stood just inside, wringing her hands, her shoulders rigid with anticipation. The air in the room thickened again, but it wasn't the cold silence of years past. It was the breathless stillness of something trying to heal. He didn't say anything at first, just looked around the room, the same room he hadn't set foot in since he was barely a teenager. I remember this couch, he said, his voice low. It used to swallow me whole. Claire gave a soft laugh, unsure if it was allowed. You used to hide your peanut butter crackers under the cushions. Daniel smiled faintly, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. He looked at her, and for the first time I saw him see her, really see her, not as a villain, not as a ghost, but as a person. Why didn't you come back? He asked. Claire opened her mouth, but no sound came. She looked at me, then back at him, her fingers twitching like they wanted to reach for him but didn't dare. I was broken, she said, and I thought if I came back, I'd break you too. I needed you, he said. No accusation in his voice, just truth, raw and plain. "I know," she whispered. He nodded slowly. "I used to sit on the porch after school, thinking maybe you'd come back. Just walk up the steps like it was a dream. I'd imagine what I'd say. I rehearsed it 100 times. Claire's face crumpled again. "I wanted to, so many times. But I was ashamed, and then it felt too late." Daniel looked down at the floor. "I got used to the idea that you were just gone. It hurt less than hoping." That hit hard. For all of us. He sat down slowly, this time beside me. Claire remained standing, unsure of where to place herself in this new, fragile world. "You're not the only one who disappeared," Daniel said suddenly, looking at me now. "I know you were here physically, but you disappeared in your own way too." I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" He turned to me, not angry, just exposing something I hadn't dared consider. "You were here, but you weren't with me. Not always. You worked, you cooked, you drove me to school, but sometimes you looked through me, like I reminded you of her too much." The words landed heavy, but he wasn't wrong. I'd prided myself for being the one who stayed, the one who kept it all together, but I'd never stopped to think how being present wasn't the same as being emotionally available. I didn't know how to talk about it, I admitted. I was surviving. "I know," Daniel said, softer now. "We all were." Claire finally spoke again. "I didn't come here to ask for your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it, but I came because I want to know you again, even if it takes years." Daniel looked at her. His eyes were wet now, but he didn't look away. "I don't know what I can give you," he said, "but I came today because I needed to understand." Claire nodded. "That's more than I ever expected." "I'm not ready," he added, "but I'm not walking away either." That was the most honest thing he could have said. Claire wiped her face and finally sat down across from him. We were three people, broken in different ways, trying to piece together something worth salvaging. "I don't think we'll ever be what we were," I said quietly. "No," Daniel agreed, "but maybe we can be something new." And in that moment, surrounded by the wreckage of old pain and the fragile sprouts of something else, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. We sat in that silence, not the strained kind, but the kind that comes when something heavy has been set down, even if just for a while. Daniel leaned back on the couch, arms crossed loosely over his chest, the way he always did when he was trying to process too much at once. Claire watched him like a mother memorizing her child all over again. "I didn't think I'd ever come back here," Daniel said, glancing around the room. "I used to dream about it. Sometimes it was a nightmare, sometimes not." Claire gave him a faint smile. "I used to imagine what you looked like as you grew up. I missed so many versions of you." He nodded but didn't respond. I could see the conflict in his eyes, the part of him that wanted to stay guarded, and the part that desperately wanted to reach for something that resembled connection. Claire stood slowly. "I want to show you something." Daniel looked at me briefly, as if silently asking if it was okay. I nodded once, and he followed her down the hallway. I sat alone in the living room, the quiet pressing in again. My eyes drifted to the photo on the mantel, Daniel in his Halloween costume, dressed as a tiny firefighter, missing one front tooth. Claire had taken that picture. She'd crouched on the sidewalk, cheering him on as he ran from door to door with his plastic pumpkin. I hadn't thought about that night in years. How we laughed afterwards, sitting on the porch, trading his candy back and forth while he fell asleep between us. That memory hurt now, not because it was bad, but because it was good, and because it was gone. I heard their footsteps return a few minutes later. Daniel carried a small box in his hands, and Claire trailed behind him, her eyes uncertain. "What's that?" I asked. He sat back down and opened the lid. Inside were old photographs, birthday cards, a paper handprint from kindergarten. He held up a drawing, a crude stick figure family labeled me, mommy, daddy, and looked at it for a long time. "I forgot I made this," he said. "You made that after your 5th birthday," Claire said gently. "You cried that night because your balloon popped." Daniel gave a dry chuckle. "I remember the balloon, not the crying." Claire smiled. "I do." He pulled out more drawings, some with faded marker stains, others still bright. One was a card that read, "I love you, Mom," in crooked letters. He stared at it for a while. Then quietly he said, "I meant that." Claire blinked fast, trying not to cry. "I know you did." He set the card down and looked at her. "I don't know how to let go of all the stuff between then and now. The missed birthdays, the silence. I don't know how to just forgive." She nodded. "Then don't, not yet. Just let me be here. Let me earn a space in your life again." Daniel didn't respond right away, but he didn't say no, and that was everything. "You should keep this box," Claire said. "It's yours." He hesitated, then slowly closed the lid. "Thanks." I watched him, and I could see something shifting. Not healed, not yet, but softening, the beginning of something new. Claire turned to me. "Can I make some tea?" I raised an eyebrow. "You still drink that weird ginger mint blend?" She laughed, a real laugh this time. Some habits die hard. Daniel looked between us, surprised to see that moment of familiarity, maybe even relieved. "I'll help," he offered. They disappeared into the kitchen, and I leaned back in my seat, exhaling slowly. Somehow, in the most unexpected way, this day had become sacred. A day where the past walked into the room, sat down, and finally asked to be understood, not erased. The clinking of mugs and the low hum of the kettle boiling in the kitchen filtered through the hallway like the distant echo of a life that could have been. I stayed in the living room, letting them have that space. Claire and Daniel, mother and son. The two people whose connection had been severed for over a decade, now standing side by side, awkwardly trying to remember the rhythm of each other. I heard a soft laugh from Daniel, a real one. It struck something deep in me. Not jealousy, though I'll admit, a part of me tightened at the sound. But more than anything, it was relief. That laugh was proof of something opening inside him, something I'd feared might stay closed forever. They returned with steaming mugs in hand. Claire had added a third, which she handed to me with a small, tentative smile. "Still no sugar?" she asked. I smirked. "Still bitter." "As always." She laughed again, and even Daniel smiled at that. We sat like that for a while. 3 mugs, 3 silences, and 3 people trying to remember who they were to each other. "I had a dream about you once," Daniel said suddenly, looking at Claire. "It was last year. You were standing at the end of the driveway waving. You looked young, like when I was little. I wanted to run to you, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were stuck in cement." Claire's fingers tightened around her mug. "And then," he continued, "you just turned around and walked away. I woke up shaking. I hadn't thought about you in months, and suddenly, there you were." "I'm so sorry, Daniel," Claire said softly. "I left so much behind. I didn't even know what it would do to you. I only thought about how trapped I felt." Daniel nodded slowly. "I used to tell myself you died, not because I wanted it to be true, but because it was easier than believing you just didn't want me." Claire broke. She didn't sob, didn't wail, just covered her mouth and let the tears fall like they'd been waiting years for permission. "I wanted you more than anything," she said through her hands. "But I didn't know how to be what you needed. I was drowning inside myself, Daniel. I thought letting you go would save you from me." He looked down, struggling to keep his own emotions at bay. "You could have come back." "I know," she said, wiping her face. "And I didn't. And I'll carry that with me for the rest of my life." Another long pause. Then he asked something I didn't expect. "Did you ever think about me on my birthday?" Claire's body shuddered with the weight of the question. "Every year," she whispered. "I baked a cake once. The first year. I didn't know what else to do. I sat in the kitchen and cried over it. It never got eaten." Daniel didn't say anything, but he nodded, slowly, quietly, and I saw something flicker behind his eyes. Recognition, maybe. That grief doesn't always look like presents. Sometimes it looks like a cake that no one ever eats. "You left a hole," he said finally. "But I think part of me still wants to believe you didn't mean to." Claire looked at him like that sentence had just cracked her open. "I didn't," she said. "I never meant to disappear. I just didn't know how to come back." Daniel looked at her for a long moment. And then, slowly, Cautiously, he reached out and placed his hand over hers, just for a second, but it was enough. Claire choked back a sob, and I looked away, giving them that moment. Maybe forgiveness didn't arrive all at once. Maybe it came in inches, in shared tea, in untold dreams. In the simple gesture of reaching out across a decade of silence. Maybe, I thought, this was the start of something none of us knew we still needed. That evening, light began to fade through the blinds, casting long amber shadows across the room. I watched the way it softened Claire's features, the way it made Daniel's profile look more like the little boy I remembered, the one who used to curl up beside me with his blanket and ask why stars didn't fall from the sky. He was still holding the memory box on his lap. His fingers traced the edge of the lid, while Claire watched him, careful not to push, not to ask too much. "Do you ever think," Daniel said, breaking the silence, "that things would have been different if you'd stayed?" Claire exhaled slowly. "Every day." "What do you see?" he asked, not accusing, just curious, needing to know. She hesitated, then answered softly, "I imagine I would have taken you to your first day of high school, made you breakfast, argued with you about staying up too late on your phone." She smiled faintly. "I imagine I would have annoyed you." Daniel laughed under his breath. "And maybe we would have fought. Maybe I would have still messed things up. But I would have tried to fix it while I still had the chance. I would have let you yell at me, let you slam your door, but I would have stayed." She paused. "I was selfish, Daniel. I was so wrapped up in my own fear. I forgot that you were learning how to feel from watching me. And I taught you silence. I'm sorry." He looked down, swallowing hard. "I did yell," he said. "Once. I stood in my room when I was 14 and screamed into a pillow, screamed your name." Claire wiped her face with a trembling hand. "I guess I wanted to know if it still meant anything to you," he added. "It did," she said. "It does." I sat with their pain quietly, letting them have the space they needed. My role wasn't to fix anything, just to bear witness, to hold the space they hadn't been able to hold for each other all those years. "Dad never talked bad about you," Daniel said suddenly, glancing my way. "He never told me what really happened. He just said, 'Your mum is figuring herself out.'" Claire turned to me, her eyes wide with surprise. "I didn't want to build hate where there should have been healing," I said, "even when I didn't know if that healing would ever come." She stared at me for a long moment, then said quietly, "Thank you." I nodded, but I didn't feel proud, just tired, like a soldier laying down a sword he never wanted to carry. Daniel leaned back against the couch and closed his eyes. "I don't know what happens next." "Neither do I," Claire admitted. "But I'd like to try something small, like texting or calling, nothing big, just slowly." Daniel nodded. "Okay." There was no dramatic music, no sudden embrace. Just that one word. "Okay." And somehow, it was enough. Later, when we got up to leave, Claire walked us to the door. She hesitated before opening it. "Would it be okay if I hugged you?" she asked Daniel. He stood there for a long moment, then stepped forward, not into her arms, not quite, but close enough for her to wrap her arms around him gently. He let it happen, didn't flinch, didn't pull away. She closed her eyes, holding him like she was holding every lost year between them. And when they stepped back, something about Daniel's face had changed. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was the start of something that might become peace. We got into the car, and for a long time we drove in silence. Then Daniel said, "Thanks for turning around." I glanced at him. "Always." And for the first time in a long time, I believed we were heading somewhere worth going. We didn't talk much on the drive back. Daniel stared out the window, the Boston skyline bleeding into dusk behind him. Streetlights flickered on as we merged onto the freeway, headlights sliding across our windshield in quiet patterns. I kept my hands steady on the wheel, but my mind was everywhere, turning over everything that had happened in the past few hours. "Do you think she meant it?" he asked suddenly. I glanced at him. "What?" "The stuff she said, about wanting to be in my life again." I thought for a moment before answering. "I think..." It took her a long time to find the words, and even longer to gather the courage to say them. "That's not nothing." Daniel nodded slowly. It just felt like she was still holding something back. She probably was, I said. Most people do when they're afraid they've already lost too much. He leaned his head against the window. I don't want to need her, but I think part of me still does. That's okay. Is it? Yeah, I said. Needing someone isn't weakness, Daniel, especially when it's someone who should have been there all along. He was quiet after that. I could feel the war inside him, the part that wanted to crack open the door to something new, and the part that wanted to slam it shut to avoid more hurt. I understood that war better than I cared to admit. We stopped at a red light. Across the street, a mother and her young son were waiting at the corner, the boy bouncing slightly, gripping her hand. The sight was so ordinary, so gentle, it made something ache inside me. She missed so much, Daniel said, barely above a whisper. I know. But she kept the drawings, the cards. I didn't think she had anything from when I was little. She held on, I said. Even when she couldn't be there, she held on in her own way. She could have called. She could have, I agreed. He looked at me, his face shadowed but clear. Did you ever think about leaving? The question hit me like a sucker punch. No, I said, but I thought about breaking more than once. He nodded slowly, eyes returning to the windshield. I think I needed to hear that. When we pulled into our driveway, the porch light was on, a small, quiet welcome. I turned off the engine, and we sat there for a moment in the stillness. Daniel turned to me. You really never bad-mouthed her, not once. I was angry, I said. Still am sometimes, but I didn't want you to carry that. You had enough already. He looked down, then back up at me. Thanks. I reached over and squeezed his shoulder, and he let me. That small touch, it carried something years in the making. We went inside, the house dim and familiar. Daniel set the box Claire had given him on the kitchen table, then disappeared into his room without a word. I didn't follow. He needed time to sort through what today had cracked open. I stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the box. Inside were fragments of a childhood we both tried to protect in different ways. Paper memories, silent years, the unanswered questions that still hovered in the spaces between. I didn't know if Daniel would ever fully forgive Claire. I didn't know if I would either. But I knew something shifted today, not healed, but shifted. And sometimes that's how forgiveness begins. Not in a grand gesture, but in one person saying, I'll try. The next morning I found Daniel sitting at the kitchen table, the memory box open in front of him again. His hair was a mess, his eyes a little puffy. He looked like he hadn't slept much, but there was something steadier in his posture, less tension in his shoulders. He didn't look up as I walked in. She wrote letters, he said. I froze. What? He reached into the box and pulled out a small bundle of yellowed envelopes, tied together with a piece of twine. There are 12 of them, one for each year she missed. I sat down slowly across from him. He handed me one of the envelopes. The handwriting was unmistakably hers, the same way she used to label our freezer meals or leave notes on the bathroom mirror. She never sent them, he said. Just kept writing. I held the envelope carefully, as if it might crumble under the weight of its own silence. Do you want to read one? He asked. I hesitated, then nodded. He untied the twine and handed me one labeled Daniel, age 11. I opened it with shaking hands. The letter inside was short, honest, uneven in places like she'd written through tears. Dear Danny, it's your birthday today. I imagine you're tall now. Maybe your voice is changing. I wish I could hear it. I wish I could tell you how proud I am, even from far away. I know I don't deserve to say that, but I feel it, every day. I hope you're still playing soccer, or maybe piano. You always loved music. I wonder if you still dance in the kitchen like you used to when I made pancakes. There's so much I want to say, but none of it changes the fact that I left. I hope one day you can forgive me, even just a little. Love always, Mom. I stared at the letter, unable to speak. Daniel read another silently, then placed it carefully back in the box. She kept them all, he said, like she was waiting for the right time. Maybe yesterday was the right time, I said. Maybe, he said, but it still hurts. I reached for my coffee, unsure what to do with all this tenderness, all this pain blooming in unexpected places. Do you think I should write her back? He asked suddenly. I didn't answer right away. That's not my decision, I said. But if you're asking whether she'd want to hear from you, I think she already has just by showing up yesterday. He looked down at the box again. I don't know what I'd say. Start with what's true, I said. Not what you think she wants to hear. He nodded slowly. Later that day, I found him at his desk, pen in hand, staring at a blank sheet of paper. He'd start writing, then scratch it out. Start again. Stop. But he was trying. That was enough for now. Over the next week, he and Claire began texting. Short messages at first, hesitant and careful. A photo here, a memory there. Sometimes just a simple thinking of you. Or do you remember this song? One afternoon, Daniel asked if I'd drive him to the cemetery. Who's there? I asked, confused. Her mom, he said. My grandmother. Claire's mother had passed 4 years ago. She and Daniel had been close when he was little, but he hadn't seen her since the divorce. Claire mentioned it in one of the letters, he explained. She said her mum kept a photo of me on her dresser until the end. I drove him there quietly, watching him walk between the stones holding a single flower. He knelt at the grave and whispered something I couldn't hear. I stayed in the car, letting him have that moment. When he came back, he was quiet for a while, then said, I think she lost more than I realized. Claire, I mean. I nodded. She did. But I still lost more. That too was true. And still, they were trying. Reaching across the broken places. Somehow this messy, complicated, unfinished story of ours was growing into something we hadn't expected. Not a return, but a rebuilding. The days that followed had a strange rhythm, like we were all living in the in-between, not in the past anymore, but not fully in the future either. Just somewhere suspended, trying to figure out how to move forward without breaking the fragile threads we'd just started to weave back together. Claire texted Daniel every morning. Nothing heavy. Just thinking of you today, or saw your favorite cereal at the store made me smile. Sometimes she'd send a picture of an old drawing or a childhood trinket she found in a drawer. And Daniel, he responded. Not every time. But often enough that I could see it wasn't just politeness. He was feeling his way through it. One night I walked past his room and saw him reading another letter from the box. His shoulders were slouched, head tilted, like he was somewhere far away. I didn't interrupt. Some griefs are private. At dinner a few days later, he surprised me. She invited me over, he said. I looked up from my plate. When? Tomorrow. Just for lunch. I nodded slowly. You gonna go? He shrugged, picking at his food. I think I want to. Then go. He didn't look up. You won't be mad. Why would I be mad? Because it's her. I set down my fork. Daniel, you're allowed to want your mother in your life. This isn't about choosing between us. You're not a battlefield. He blinked, then gave a short, uncertain smile. Thanks. The next day, I watched him get ready like he was preparing for something sacred. He changed shirts twice, spent longer than usual fixing his hair. When he left, I didn't say much, just, drive safe, and he nodded. When he came back, hours later, I was sitting on the porch. He sat down next to me without a word. Well, I asked after a while. It was weird, he said, but not bad. She made grilled cheese, same way she used to. Burned the edges, I laughed. I remember. She showed me her garden, said she started it a few years ago, said it helps with the quiet. We sat in silence for a bit. She told me about the day she left, he said, told me more than she ever has. I glanced at him. She said she packed her bag while I was at school, said she cried the whole time, that she stood outside the door for 20 minutes before walking in. He paused. She said I smiled at her when I came in, said that almost broke her. I swallowed hard. She told me she was afraid I'd grow up hating her, and, he looked down at his hands, I told her I did, for a long time. My chest tightened. What did she say? She said she deserved that. And then she asked if I still did. I waited. And? I asked. Daniel shrugged. I said I don't know anymore, but I'm trying not to. We sat there, watching the streetlights flicker on. You know, he said, she asked about you. I raised an eyebrow. Oh? She said she never gave you credit, that you were stronger than she ever realized. That sat heavy between us. I told her she was probably right, Daniel added, nudging me gently with his shoulder. I smiled a little. Then he said something that stopped me cold. She said if you ever wanted to talk, she'd be willing. I turned to him. Talk about what? I don't know, he said. Everything. Nothing. Just talk. I looked out at the quiet street, and for the first time the idea didn't fill me with resentment. It filled me with possibility. Maybe, I said. One day. Daniel nodded, and we sat in the fading light, both of us aware that something had changed again. Something deep and subtle. Forgiveness wasn't a finish line, it was a path. And somehow we'd both taken another step. A week passed before I heard from Claire again. She didn't text me directly. She sent a message through Daniel, a simple one. If he ever wants to talk, really talk, I'm here. No expectations, no rewrites, just truth. I didn't respond right away. Truth be told, I wasn't sure I could handle just truth. For years I'd told myself that closure was unnecessary, that I'd patched up the wounds well enough with time and distance. But watching Daniel walk through his own quiet storm, seeing the way he opened up inch by inch, something began to stir in me. The next evening, I found myself driving. No real plan, I didn't tell Daniel. Didn't call ahead, I just drove. I parked in front of her house in the same house from that day. The porch light was on. For a full minute, I sat in the car with the engine running, then killed it and stepped out. The door opened before I knocked. Claire stood there, surprised but not startled, like she'd known I might come. Eventually. Hey, she said gently. Hey. She stepped aside without a word, and I walked in. We sat in the same room, but this time it felt different. No longer full of ghosts, just two people trying to breathe the same air after years of separate weather. You really meant it? I asked. What? That you wanted to talk. She nodded. I've wanted to for a long time. I sat on the edge of the couch, elbows on my knees. Then let's do it. Let's talk. She folded her hands in her lap. You want to go first? I chuckled dryly. Not particularly. She smiled softly, then looked down. I think I left more damage behind than I realized. You did. She winced but didn't turn away. You held everything together. I didn't thank you. I didn't even acknowledge it. I didn't do it for thanks. I know, she said, but you deserved it anyway. There was a long pause. She stared at the floor. I stared at the wall. I was angry for a long time, I said, but mostly I was confused. I thought we were in this together. I thought we'd find a way back. I thought so too, she said quietly, until I couldn't see a way anymore. I don't expect you to understand, but I wasn't okay. I was crumbling inside. I felt like I couldn't breathe in this life anymore. You didn't tell me. I didn't know how. I thought if I admitted I was drowning, it would destroy you too. So instead you left. And it did destroy me. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't argue. I'm not asking for you to excuse it, she said. I want you to know that I wasn't trying to punish you. I wasn't trying to escape you. I was trying to survive. I sat back, letting the words sit between us. I never remarried, I said. I know. I tried dating once or twice, but it always felt like a lie. She wiped her cheek. Me too. We looked at each other, the air between us raw and honest. I don't hate you anymore, I said, surprised at my own words. Her eyes widened slightly. I did, I added. For a long time. I hated you for leaving, for breaking him, for breaking me, but I think part of that hate was just grief in disguise. Claire nodded, tears slipping down silently. I'm not here to fix anything, I said. Just to tell you that I'm not carrying it the same way anymore. She took a deep breath. Thank you. We sat in that quiet understanding for a while. No need to fill it. Then, softly, she said, "Do you think we'll ever be friends?" I thought about that. "I think we already are," I said. "Just a different kind." She smiled. When I stood to leave, she didn't reach for me, didn't try to hold on to the moment. Instead, she simply said, "Tell Daniel I'm proud of him." "I will." And as I walked back to the car, I felt something lift from my shoulders. Not gone, but lighter. Forgiveness isn't always a declaration. Sometimes it's a quiet decision to stop bleeding. When I got home, the house was quiet. Daniel was in the living room, headphones on, laptop open, but he looked up the moment I walked through the door. He studied me with that same quiet attentiveness he's always had, like he could read the air before I said a word. "You went," he said. Not a question. I nodded, slipping off my coat. "Yeah." He pulled off his headphones. "How'd it go?" I sat down across from him. "Strange, heavy, good, I think." He waited, giving me room. "She didn't make excuses," I said. "She didn't try to rewrite anything, just told the truth." Daniel nodded slowly. "She's been doing that more lately." We sat in silence for a minute. "You okay?" I asked. "I think so," he said. "Are you?" I thought about it. "I'm getting there." He closed his laptop. "I think I am too." We didn't talk much more that night, but something had shifted between us. It wasn't just that we had survived this strange detour through the past. It was that we had done it together, each of us taking steps in our own way, but never out of sight of the other. The next day, Claire texted me directly. "Thank you for coming. I didn't expect it, but I'm grateful you did." I replied simply, "We needed it. All of us." She didn't say anything more. She didn't have to. Later that week, Daniel asked if we could all meet again. Together this time. No hidden doorways, no proxy conversations, just the three of us in one room. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because part of me still feared what might come up, what might not be resolved, what might still hurt. But I said yes. We met at a diner on the edge of town, neutral ground, familiar enough to feel safe, but far enough from any memory that might swallow us. Claire was already there when we arrived. She stood as we walked in, nervous but composed. Daniel gave her a brief, tentative hug. I offered a polite nod. We sat in a booth by the window. At first it was small talk. The weather, a movie Daniel wanted to see, some joke about the coffee being dishwater. It felt awkward, but not painful. Then Claire said, "I know this is probably strange for you both, sitting here like this." "It is," I said, "but it's not wrong." Daniel nodded. "I used to imagine dinners like this," she said, "when I thought about coming back, but they always felt impossible." "I think we all did," Daniel said, "in our own way." She looked at him. "I'm still learning how to show up." "You're doing okay," he said. "It's not perfect, but it's something." That was the theme of everything now. It's not perfect, but it's something. We stayed at the diner for almost 2 hours. Nothing dramatic happened. No confessions, no breakdowns, just a quiet unfolding of what had been tightly wound for years. As we walked out into the parking lot, Claire turned to both of us. "Thank you for letting me try." Daniel gave her a small, tired smile. "We're all trying." She looked at me. "And thank you, Sue, for raising him the way you did." I nodded. "I didn't do it alone, even when you weren't there." That hit her hard, but she didn't cry. She just placed a hand over her chest like she was holding the moment still. We parted ways with a strange feeling in the air, not closure exactly, but something close. Like a wound that had been cleaned, still sore, but finally able to heal. On the drive home, Daniel rolled down the window. The wind rushed in, cool and clean. "I think I'm going to be okay," he said. I didn't look at him. "Yeah," I said. "Me too." A month later, Daniel flew back to Seattle. We stood at the gate for a long time before his flight, both of us holding more than we were saying. He had his backpack slung over one shoulder, headphones hanging around his neck, and that same quiet resolve in his eyes that I'd seen grow sharper these past few weeks. "You good?" I asked. He nodded. "Yeah. Better than I thought I'd be," I smiled. "You've come a long way." He gave me a look, grateful, a little tired. "So have you." There was a pause, then he reached into his bag and pulled out one of the letters from Claire's box, the one from his 12th birthday. "I'm going to keep reading them," he said. "Not all at once, just when I feel ready." "I think that's smart." He handed me another letter, this one still unopened. "This one's for you," he said. I looked down at it. My name was written across the front in Claire's delicate script. "I found it mixed in with mine," he said. "Figured maybe she meant for you to have it someday." I held it in my hand, the paper warm from his touch. "Thanks." He hugged me then. Strong, longer than usual. The kind that said what words couldn't. "I'll call you when I land," he said. "Please do," I replied. "And take care of yourself." He smiled. "I will." I watched him walk away, backpack bouncing against his side, disappearing into the line of people heading toward the gate. And then it was just me again. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened the letter. "Dear Michael, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if I'll ever be brave enough to give it to you. But I needed to write it. I left without giving you the credit you deserved. You stayed. You carried him when I couldn't. You showed up when I vanished. I want to say that I'm sorry for making you the villain in my fear. You weren't perfect, but you were trying. And I couldn't see it then. There were nights I wanted to call you, just to say thank you, or I'm sorry. But I was afraid you'd hang up. Maybe you still would. But even if you do, I hope you know this. You gave Daniel the foundation I didn't, and I will always be grateful for that. You were stronger than I was, and in some ways maybe you still are. With regret and respect, Claire." I stared at the letter for a long time. No tears. Just stillness. A silence that didn't hurt for once. I folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer beside the memory box Daniel had left behind, said he'd take it with him next time. Over the next few weeks, things didn't suddenly become perfect. Claire and I didn't become best friends. Daniel didn't erase the years of absence from his heart. But the conversations continued, slow, cautious, real. Forgiveness had never been the destination. It was the bridge, a fragile, uncertain bridge built with shaky hands and soft words. And somehow, despite everything, we'd started crossing it together. Some days I still feel the old weight, the anger, the questions that will probably never be fully answered. But now I don't carry them alone, and neither does Daniel. And maybe, just maybe, neither does Claire. Before you go, I have one question for you. Have you ever had to forgive someone in your family, even though they never said, "I'm sorry"? Tell your story in the comments. Don't hold back. Someone out there might be going through the same thing, and your words could help them find the strength to move forward. If this story moved you even a little, share it with someone who needs to hear it. A sibling, a parent, a friend carrying something heavy. Make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next emotional journey. We're building a space here for real human stories, and you're part of it. And now, your next story is waiting. It's on the screen. Go watch it. The healing continues there.